Pretty early on in using veneers, you're going to have to learn how to cut it. And that can be done in a bunch of different ways, including veneer saws, knives, and scissors. I'm going to show you some of the techniques that I use, including using blue tape, as well as applying sandpaper to the back of rulers, which makes the process accurate and really simple. As I mentioned before, there are several different ways of cutting veneers, as well as several different tools to do the job. Veneer saws are great, and they come in a range of different prices, some starting as low as $20 and others that are upwards of $100. My favorite way is using a craft knife or a utility knife, and even amongst those there are some that work better than others. A good pair of scissors will also cut veneer depending on the grain and the thickness of the veneer. You can also use a track saw, but I'm going to cover that in a different video. One of the main things that I do use a track saw for is jointing veneers. Like all things in woodworking, you have to have sharp tools to do a good job, and veneer saws are no exception. Some of the lower price saws won't come pre-sharpened, so you're going to have to spend some time tuning them up. Others, like this one from Chestnut Tools, or my favorite from Gramercy Tools, comes pre-sharpened. You'll also notice that there's a curve to these blades, which actually helps in cutting the veneers. If you're going to use a veneer saw to cut your veneers, then you're going to need a couple of things. One is a guide rail that's milled up square and true. I've also attached 120 grit self-adhesive sandpaper to the back so it doesn't shift as I'm doing the cutting. What also works best is using a hardwood plywood as the base to cut on, with the grain running perpendicular to your cut. You don't want to use a cutting mat, as the saws will cut through it. To cut your veneer, you're going to place your veneer on your sacrificial piece of plywood, your guide rail on top of the spot where you want to do the cut, and you'll notice that the grain of the sacrificial piece runs perpendicular to the cut. Now, traditionally with solid wood you would go back and forth, but with the veneer saw I'm only going to go in one direction, and I'm going to use the whole curve of the blade. You can see how clean of a cut a good sharpened veneer saw leaves on the edge. Occasionally you're going to come across some veneer that just doesn't want to be cut cleanly. And what I mean by that is it's going to want to tear out before the cut is complete. There are two things you can do to help that along. One is to make sure that you do have sandpaper on the bottom of your guide rail, and that when you do the cut you push down a little bit harder. The other thing to do is to start the initial cut towards the center of the veneer and then complete your cut the other way. Cutting veneers with a sharp pair of scissors does work well, but you're going to find that it's really dependent on the veneer. My favorite way of cutting veneers is actually using a utility knife, and I prefer the ones that have a stiffer blade over the ones that are more flexible. A scalpel knife will work as well, but I find I use those more for detailed work. And no matter what style you use, you want to make sure that you have sharp blades and that you're either breaking them away or replacing them when they go dull. Unless you're cutting a curve, a circle, or some sort of pattern, you're going to need a straight rail to do your cuts. This guide rail that worked well for veneer saws is a little too high for utility knives. What I like to use is a steel ruler backed with, again, 120 grit sandpaper. It's just a matter of lining up your cut and taking several light passes until the veneer breaks away. Occasionally when you're cross-cutting veneer, it's going to want to tear out before it actually completes the cut. In those circumstances, we can push a little bit harder on the rail, backed with sandpaper, but we can also put down some masking tape and then mush it in with a round-faced hammer. This makes sure that the masking tape sticks to the grain of the veneer. We can now come in and complete our cuts very cleanly. If you don't want to break out the masking tape, another method is to do some of the cut towards the center of the veneer and then flip the knife over and complete the cut the other way. Most of the time when I'm cutting veneers, I'm actually using my core as the pattern. A couple of things to keep in mind when using masking tape. I find that the brand name ones like 3M or Scotch work much better than the no-name dollar store brands. The cheaper ones tend to tear out and you'll just get frustrated. The other thing to do is to make sure that when you peel away the masking tape, that you peel it against itself rather than pull up on it. This will prevent the veneer from getting damaged. Cutting veneer is actually easier than cutting solid wood. You just have to have the right tools and make sure that they're really sharp.